Satnam, welcome to another episode of the One Flow podcast. My name is Jago Paul Khalsa. I'm the creator and the host of the One Flow. And today I'm really psyched because a very good friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, is the guest today. His name is Remington Donovan, and he is a master numerologist, astrologer, tarot card reader. He's also an expert in a lot of different fields like Kabbalah, magic studies, and a lot of esoteric arts. Now, like I said, I've known him for many years. Many of you know me. I'm from New York City. I grew up, born and raised in the city, and I'm quite a skeptic of anyone who claims to be a psychic or know the unknown. However, in my travels, there are those people who are the real deal. And Remington Donovan is the real deal. I can count on one hand, which is 5 fingers, how many of these legit people I've met over the years in my travels. And Remington's at the top of that list. I will just say, my teacher says this all the time. When you have somebody who's a psychic or has some talents like that, everybody who's a psychic is doing it through the lens of their own subconscious. They're looking out through their own subconscious. So you're going to have biases. So when I say about people who are legit, and that there's a handful of them, there's a handful of people who can go into a Shuniya state, which is a zero state, where they become a pipeline and they become a channel, if you will, and they can pull down information that's for you with much less bias. There's always a little bit of bias there, but the real masters can pull down the information and help you. And that's what these types of people like to do, who are the real deal. They want to help you be better, not just get your money. And so Remington is at the top of that list, like I said. Welcome, Remington Donovan, to the One Flow podcast.
Jago Paul, thank you. I'm really psyched you got this going, and to also be a part of it. So, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really psyched to have you here. So let's start out. I want everybody to kind of get a little background about who you are and where you're from. And we were just talking about this before we started recording, but you grew up in an ashram in Virginia, right? It was called Yogaville.
Yes and no. I actually grew up. I too am from New York City originally, so my family is a long line of New Yorkers. And in the '60s, Swami Satchidananda came to America. So his teacher, who is Swami Shivananda, and they have a lineage that goes back to about 800 AD, maybe even earlier, of like direct student teacher, student teacher, student teacher. And he was told by his teacher to go to the West and teach and bring yoga to the West. And that was a time that just a handful of people came to the West to share these practices. I like to share that because there's a real dark movement and a confusion where people talk about like appropriation of culture and yoga. And that's just inherently bullshit. They don't understand the history, and they don't know. First of all, they've never experienced being part of spiritual traditions where everybody is showing up and everybody's welcome. But these teachers that came to the West, that came to America, Yogananda being one of the earlier ones, they were directed and they were guided by their teachers to start and say, we got to share these teachings. And I grew up in that. So New York City was where Satchidananda really got based, and my dad got into yoga before I was born, met my mom, then got her into it, and he taught yoga at the Integral Yoga Institute that is still in New York City. They had 2 locations. It's in the West Village. I was born in Greenwich Village, and we had an apartment. I was a baby. I wasn't paying the rent, or maybe I was energetically, but anyhow, that's where it started for me. Was in New York. Pretty much born. I was born into that lineage of Swami Satchidananda, and he was one of the heavy hitters to come to America. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched the Woodstock documentary, but he opened the whole Woodstock ceremony. He was tight with Yogi Bhajan. They were friends. Yogi Bhajan used to come to his talks. And you know, my dad was teaching yoga, so that was my first, you know, first teacher in a way. I mean, there's my parents, but I was born like knowing someone at that caliber. And that is in New York City, and then they got a little bit of money and they bought land in Connecticut, and that's mostly where I grew up. And then so there was a huge ashram there. We had our own school. As a child, not only did I learn yoga, all of the children had to teach yoga. So I was 7 years old leading and teaching yoga classes. And the school, which maybe at maximum kids, the biggest year was like 12 kids. Each student had to know how to teach a whole yoga set, lead meditations. And so we would take turns, like, you know, we'd have whatever, I'd teach, you know, whatever on Thursday or whatever the case was. And that's where it all started. And when he held me as a baby and said he too will help spread the light.
You know, I'm glad you said that. That was going to be one of my questions, but which I'll get to in a second. But when you say that his teacher told him to come to the United States, I just finished reading the biography of Swami Rama, which is called At the 11th Hour. Now, I had read Swami Rama's book that he wrote, Living with the Himalayan Masters, which is a fantastic book. But everything you're describing, Swami, is also in that book At the 11th Hour. That the Swami Rama's master told him also, come to the West and teach them our way of life. And this is all programmed in for the Aquarian age. All these masters, Yogi Bhajan and, you know, your teacher, Satchidananda, because I'm your teacher. Yeah, he was, you know, I don't know how well to say it. He was your teacher. But also, and Swami Rama and Rajneesh Osho, who became Osho, in that documentary about them. And then, of course, all of them get smeared as, you know, as like sexual perverts and all that stuff. That's all fake and made up because they don't want these masters and that way of life changing people to be heart-centered, evolved, and independent. But so I wanted to touch on that. You also mentioned. Cultural appropriation, which is total bullshit. And what I'd like to do is I like to use another woke term of spiritual bypassing, and I bypass all that bullshit. I just want to say one thing about cultural appropriation. I've been accused of that myself. When I was stationed in the army, I was in Greece and that kind of stuff, and also now being Sikh, I've been in India, and some bozo threw that out at me at some 3HO event, one about cultural appropriation. And to be honest with you, that's another thing that tries to get people away from good things, like and unity. Because when I was in Greece, I learned to speak Greek, and I remember going to this farmhouse with these people who we were going to possibly rent their place. And when I spoke Greek to these simple farmers who basically didn't really much leave the farm, they were so excited and over the moon that this guy from America was trying to speak their language. The same thing goes for being Sikh. When I go to India, these people come up to me at the Golden Temple so excited, and they try to speak Hindi to me and stuff like that. I'm embarrassed that I don't speak Punjabi or Hindi, which is funny. So, but
well, yeah. I mean, it's really what you said, though. It's a dark movement to keep people out of their heart centers. Yeah. And people don't understand. So, like, I literally from birth grew up with yoga with somebody from India, and you know, even though the physical practice was hatha yoga, it's the whole lifestyle. It's a whole life. It's not just like doing stretchy poses or just kundalini poses or meditating. It's like this whole gambit of a new life. And you know, I give those teachers credit, and I give a lot of credit to Satchidananda, because a lot of yoga as we know it in America, where it's way more commonplace and you can buy a yoga mat probably at Walmart or something like that, is because he helped bring it on on a really big mainstream, and the Integral Yoga Institute was one of the first to just organize this teacher training so that people who learned it also knew what the spiritual tradition was, where it's not just like go to the gym and sweat a little.
Yeah, what these people don't, what most people, and this is why we're doing this on the podcast, what most people don't understand about these sciences is that like the stuff that these masters are bringing over from the Himalayas or have brought over, and that we're now continuing the tradition of teaching, is that it's a technology of the human mind body system. And it's not just some, like you said, it's going exercise and stretchy stuff that's been bastardized. And just like anything, it's another gate that you need to pass through in sincerity to get to the real teachings. But what I wanted to pick up on was, first of all, I just had to touch on that cultural appropriation and spiritual bypassing, because people need to know that these are very calculated social injections into the social psyche to get people away from their heart center, to get people away from this technology that's been brought to the West by these great masters, starting 50, 60 years ago, in order to help humanity evolve. So people should know that stuff is calculated. Anyway, I probably shouldn't have gone on that tangent because I wanted to go ahead.
Well, I do want to say one thing. As far as this, I feel like that, I'm sort of out of that algorithm, if you will. But as far as this notion, because I noticed for a while it was real hot and heavy. You're spiritually bypassing if you're not like gung ho and every bullshit social justice thing. But in the magical tradition, the teaching is that spirituality is your entire life. So that if you're being spiritual, there's no possible way you could bypass anything. So spirituality is like having your feet grounded in the world, in the tangible 3D, like, oh, I got to pay my bills and I need to like drive a car to get to work or whatever you do, as well as like we work in all these different worlds, and our heads are in the clouds and we're pulling strings in the ethers, in the cosmos, and we go into other dimensions, and we also have brilliant and sharp minds, and we have deep emotions and love and expansion, and we work, and those are the Kabbalistic four worlds: fire, water, air, and earth. Our spirituality is all of that and transcends that. So when something is the whole of your life, this notion that you're just going off into the clouds to in avoidance, there just is no such thing as spiritual bypassing if everything is spiritual. Now, people, sure, you could be avoidant through anything. Go have a couple of cocktails and watch the game. Like that. Like it's just such a false notion. You're not being spiritual if you're spiritually it's just an impossible phrase, if that makes sense.
I found that term spiritual bypassing is used to shut someone down when they're trying to inject some wisdom of spirituality. But anyway, go ahead.
I'm saying the quote real world plus the transcendent consciousness. Hey man, everything's connected, which is Kabbalah. Like it's all a part of it. But yeah, it's all psyops to take people away from something that would give them a greater experience of themselves and say, whoa, I have an infinite soul and an infinite heart, and I can actually have a prosperous life and do it all.
That's, I think what you said is very accurate. Well, I'm not in that algorithm. I haven't really seen or heard much of it anymore either, but I guess I'm a little, put off by when I did hear it. Honestly, I think a lot of people are just not buying that bullshit. And that's why we're not seeing it as much, because a lot of things like that were put out there, and they all started to happen around 2020, or slightly before, early 2020.
The numerology of Kobe Bryant's death, that was a portal opening to a lot of what's happening now.
A lot of what's happening now, you said?
Yeah, the shift then into 2020 and all this insanity of the world. And
interesting.
Lockdowns and George Floyd. We know what's happening. We know the shit.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it was interesting to see it all work out. I think that a lot of stuff that's being tried is to sway us into like darker timelines is just not working. So it's sort of like, well, let's try this, that kind of thing. But I don't want to go there. What I wanted to come back to is I actually had the question for you when you said at the end of the first part that Swami Satchidananda said, "This one too shall spread the light." Is that what he said? Well,
yeah, he held me as an infant.
Yeah, and that's what he said. Because what I wanted to say is a lot of people don't know. There's a thing called the master's touch. If you've studied Kundalini yoga and you become a Kundalini yoga teacher, you know it, and it's a state where you get a touch from the master energetically, and that can awaken talents within you. So that's important to say, that it awakens talents within you, right? And it gives you something, but it's within you, right? So do you think that Swami Satchidananda saying that to you, being held by him, such a great master that you grew up around, do you think that you got something from that?
Oh God, 100,000,000%. And I contemplate on this, kind of regularly as an adult. Because because as a child, what I realized, I should say, as an adult is I realize now as a child, it's like I'm getting a totally different experience, right? And I'm living it, and I'm getting that in that tradition. You'd say that like darshan, right? So that's that master's touch, where he's sort of recalibrating and holding the space. And it's more that I feel like these high masters are also just a conduit, right? It wasn't about Satchidananda-ism. I always thought that was sort of interesting when Osho changed his name, because everyone was creating Rajneeshism, if you will. And but not to analyze him, that's just how I feel about it. But the few kids that I grew up with there, it's interesting because a lot of them are really like worldly successful. A lot of them are very famous, and or very successful in a career. And there's a bunch of, like, out of 12 kids, a lot have become like mega famous. And not that that's necessarily a gauge of success, but on one level it is. Like they came into this incarnation, and then they put their projection into something, whether it was music or acting. And I think that opened channels. And I definitely received something. And it wasn't until I was much older and meeting our community and our teachers in Los Angeles that I started to learn, oh, this is a skill that I'm allowed to create and have a job and thrive off of. My spirituality had always been my private, separate life. And now it's not only is it the whole of my life, it's like what I literally do for a living, and I write books and things like that. But absolutely, Satchidananda's energy. The kids that I know that are adults now, we talk about it all the time.
So
And
that
they just know, because when you're a kid in it, I wasn't. Yeah, I do the yoga because it was like part of the school, almost like our gym class, and I had fun teaching it. And I didn't know any different. I just was like, cool, this is what we're doing now. Nobody was rebelling against it. And I did love the sense of ritual. In that tradition, we did pujas. So we would have like little ghee lamps, and I'm like 7-year-old boy. I get to play with fire and make the little symbols. And there was a whole ritual, and you light candles, and there's incense. I love that. And but one of my friends is like a pretty known musician, and he just is like he grew up with the guru. Like the guru's still there, like directing some energy and helping open up so many channels.
That's interesting that you say the guru is still there, because in these practices, which is essentially guru yoga, like you mentioned Swami Satchidananda, his master, and then in these books that is Swami Rama, it's very much guru yoga, where you have a teacher, and that teacher is the whole thing, and then you practice, and it's up to you to practice and get up to that certain level, but then you get past something. But ultimately it's all coming from you. The teacher is even your own creation. So it's interesting. that the master can awaken something in you, can actually give you an energetic transfer, but like you said, recalibrating some talent within you. And it's a very, they call it darshan, they call it the guru's grace or guru prasad, where you've earned it somewhere along the line, and then you cross paths with the master, and they give you this touch that awakens in you some talent that you can then go on and use as a gift to give to the world. That's why I call it a gift, right? So it's interesting that you say that all these people that you grew up with, they all sort of had that touch and then went on to be successful. I talk about these things in length because I think that a lot of people need to hear about them, because a lot of people practice Kundalini yoga and yoga in the West that don't really get that there's this rich lineage there, and that even today in the West, when we practice Kundalini yoga, the real juice comes from the lineage. It comes from connecting to the golden chain through the mantra, but also through teachers who have gotten that touch, and it's there, but of course, the lineage has been attacked, and so it's even more obscured, oddly enough, now, but you gotta earn it. So people who are practicing these practices, there's a reward there. They say that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. If you practice yoga and meditation purely from a lineage, and you do it with devotion, or you do it with an open heart, then at some point a teacher like this can show up, and you can earn that touch if you're lucky. It's a very graceful, it's a gift.
Well, I mean, my gratitude for being born into that energy field, I'm beyond grateful. So, in the magical tradition, the teaching is that you go through these incarnations, you're working on your spiritual development, what we call the great work, with devotion to the great work, which is your soul's work and your mission, your purpose. Whether at some point you're burning off a lot of karma, and then all of a sudden you start getting into incarnations where you're not worried about burning off karma, you're moving into and enacting and carrying out a destiny. And so as you go through these lives, you will be exposed younger and younger in incarnations to spiritual teachings, where at some point you'll be born into a family of practitioners. Now, there are plenty of people that are practicing away that were born in horrific circumstance. But it was interesting later in life through magic to find that teaching. And I was like, oh, I was born into a family of practitioners. So some of this is stuff I bring in the past life. But my experience of growing up on an ashram, which I cherish, and I'm still friends, like a lot of these people, you still always have a sense of family. These people are my brothers and sisters, even though we connect, we text once in a while or social media, but we know there's a special bond. But growing up in that very open-minded practice where I valued and learned to value spiritual dedication and devotion, and that bhakti energy was very much a part of it. And when you're a child, that's what, for me, I was absorbed in. The intellectual stuff wasn't interesting. When they had satsang, when people are sitting around, satsang in that tradition is when the master comes and gives talks. And used Saturday in that tradition was usually the day. I wanted to go because I wanted to see my friends and play, but I realize now I was getting all that energy. I thought whatever he was saying I thought these adults were really dumb, a lot of them. They were coming from a very, they really worship this man, but they were also coming from an old paradigm. So I really give them now so much credit, because they broke a huge cycle for humanity. They were all raised in America, where there was just an era of depression, immigration, like my parents, my ancestors were coming, just poor Jews and poor Irish people coming into New York City. My parents just broke in energy and really went full different course. And so but I remember we had to make paintings of Buddha getting enlightened. I'm like 8 years old, right? And I'm like, the hell kind of homework, like how do you paint enlightenment? Like, and I still didn't understand that, because you have adults and they start getting heady. I was just living it, right? I was a kid. I liked riding my bike. I really enjoyed chanting. I thought yoga was cool. I thought it was all cool. But I remember, so I painted a Buddha meditating under the Bodhi tree, right? And where he got enlightened. So I put like kind of halo energy, and the kids made all these paintings, and I guess they sold them as like a fundraiser for the ashram. And these adults were coming in, like these people were crying, right? And they were like, my God, this is so beautiful. This new generation of kids. I'm an 8-year-old boy. I loved Kiss. I wanted to ride my dirt bike. I wanted like pocket knives. I wanted to play war game. Like I was very just boy like. And but I understood where I was at, and I was like, who are these people? But now I realize, oh, I was getting it. I was getting it at a different level. And I have so much more respect for these adults that didn't grow up with anything like that, and grew up in a lot of, whether it's abuse or very generally Judeo-Christian thinking, and switch. So they still took some of their, what they knew as a spiritual formula, to sort of absolutely bow down and worship a teacher. Um, and what I was taught is, you take these teachings, the teacher is teaching the teachings, there is something in that teacher, but then it's up to you. And now let's take these teachings and apply them to my life. And I feel like it took me a while for that to set in and get my shit together.
Yeah, people should know that. You mentioned it's like you grow up in an ashram, or you go in a spiritual community. It's a family, but it's dysfunctional too. There's a bunch of weirdos. You're like your weird uncle and all that kind of stuff. People don't realize that, because I think when people come from, like, let's say you didn't grow up with that, and you find the spiritual practice later in life, you come into it. Like I came into this whole Sikh thing, and I thought everybody with a turban wearing white was great. And I come to find out 90% of them were freaking nuts, man. And like, I wouldn't want to be around these people. But when you first come in, you're like, oh my God, you know, and you think that's that. But I don't want to belabor that, because the fact is, those people, as screwed up as they may be, they're doing the work, and they're setting the foundation so that children like you were at that time can come into that environment and be here now as an adult doing the work that you're doing. So
As much as I like, and now we live a little closer to my mom, and I could allow her to drive me crazy, I still have to have profound respect that my parents, who also grew up with a lot of, like, my dad with alcoholism and just poverty, just sort of like a lot of, like, New York City, if you didn't have money, it was hard, it was a bummer. You still have like very poor immigrant consciousness coming through, Jewish Irish oppression. My grandfather was Irish, married my Jewish grandmother, and his family just didn't talk to him ever again because he married a Jewish woman. And so you already have all this problems, but my
So
parents.
that's because of the spiritual appropriation, the cultural appropriation. That's why they went off on it.
The but that drama, that abuse, the abuse that both of my parents went through, I really give them so much credit. Not only did they change that within themselves and my immediate family structure, which definitely had its problems, if you will, but like, they were the initial people to make a switch to say, we're bringing the West, we're bringing America, in my case, and Europe, like, into, there's a new consciousness, and a new consciousness of peace, and we're going to get these teachings out there. They weren't maybe so conscious, but you got to give a lot of credit, I mean, even I know your upbringing a little bit, and you came into this through all this, between going into the military, which to me feels like an expression of devotion anyway. And that was a time, that was a zeitgeist. And then I think that the consciousness is moving. I'm grateful for that upbringing, though, because it gave me it led me to going deeper and finding a true adept in secret and hermetic magic, Western mystery tradition, if you will, where I was able to, I dedicated my life almost to the point of, like, it was like quasi monastic life in a way. And it was very dedicated, and so I took what I liked about magic is that it was like can be high functioning in the world, and you can also be so devoted and reverent and cherish your spiritual growth and the spiritual path. Whereas a lot of people who don't know the tradition, they see magic as like you're just, wizarding a bunch of energies or being like psychic, if you will. And in real magic, being psychic like means nothing. That's just a side effect of your spiritual devotion and your spiritual growth. And it's a path of completely being dedicated to the evolution of your soul. And it's a very strict and rigorous path that is there. It is a path taught in secret. I share some stuff, but it's not about tinkering with tarot, Kabbalah, and numerology. Those are some of the tools, not any different than doing a yoga set, certain meditations. They're meditative, sacred tools. And and then I was lucky enough to really come into Kundalini Yoga, where we met many years ago. And there's a teaching in magic to not path hop, right? Because we live the Aquarian age. The sort of downside is entitlement, and people expect that they just go on Instagram, they get their little spiritual practice, or they can Amazon Prime their enlightenment, if you will. And it's like, and that's the short circuit, I think, right now, is like you still need a teacher, right? And you need a teacher to teach you those tools, and then it's up to you. It's your incarnation. You got to utilize those tools. But I was grateful for the teachers we have, and our teacher, Hari Jivan, in the beginning when I came in, and I confided in him where I'm coming from. I literally was like, am I path hopping? I was really dedicated to this tradition, and then it was time for me to go on my way. And he said, absolutely not. He said, first of all, these are secret traditions, right? Kundalini was taught only in secret up until not that long ago. Like, it's been a nanosecond of time in human experience since this was made more available. And so he said, no, these are all connected to the same mystery schools, the same mystery tradition, and his familiarity with my background. So that let me be really relaxed. And I like to utilize, from my perspective, Kundalini Yoga is a system of magic. Magic is applying these tools to cause change in your life. And Kundalini, whether it's a mantra, a meditation, I'm constantly creating change, and I'm able to take a clearer projection and then enhance it with these techniques and practices, change my energy field. Magic says whatever you want, you have to make yourself a fit receptacle. Well, doing these practices adds to changing my caliber, where I attract the things and move the ball forward with what I'm trying to do. A lot of my lessons over the last few years was just getting my shit together, like being able to, I have a child, I'm married, I'm a homeowner now. That was all hard. Even Kundalini Yoga is like, it's householders yoga. It's like, I grew up in those people, that the tradition I grew up in, those are the sannyas. They were monks and nuns. They take, it's hardcore. You take monastic vows, and that's it. You dedicate your life to the teacher and that practice. That is that lineage. And so that was like, I love the devotion, but when you're a kid and then you want to like hurdle, well, I want to do shit in the world. I didn't, I couldn't put it together. Magic helped, and then Kundalini, I was ready to like take things to another level. And then our teacher, he was like, you need to teach the esoteric stuff, but use the yoga. And he kind of joked many years ago. He goes, any idiot can teach Kundalini because you have a book, right? Like, you have a
guilty is charged. I'm probably I'm like what I just said. I'm like that guy that everybody looks and goes, oh wow, look at it with the big beard and the turban. But I'm like probably the worst student Hajiman's ever seen. Like, when I used to come in, in the early days before I even looked like this, I'm not kidding you, Remington, I would walk into the big studio that they taught at, and it was him and Tage would both look at me and go, ugh.
Well,
but maybe try harder.
I mean, the sense of humor, but it was more like, look, there's a lot of people like you can teach Kundalini, you can go through training, you can go through a book. I mean, you get the joke in it. But for my lesson in that was he really felt I should share the esoteric wisdom. And he kept trying to get me to write a book for a couple of years. He's like, you gotta really write a book. And finally, I just wrote the damn book. And which is the first one I got published is my numerology book. And this is tantric numerology that seamlessly merges mystical Kabbalah and my years of experience of doing thousands and thousands and thousands of readings. And I teach how I do it.
It's a
Right?
great
This
book.
isn't my system. It's like as if this teacher gave me permission that all these teachings merge as one teaching. And I want to say that because I do see a lot of like, sort of new age, whether it's path hopping or just hodgepodging, as I call it, where people are tinkering and pulling in on these weird made up traditions and this and that. Everything I do has come through. I've been very lucky to kind of be exposed to sort of three-ish traditions that have long lineages, long legacies that go back to ancient times. And I thought I was compartmentalizing it for a bit. It was Hari Jiva who said, no, it's all one. It's your soul. This is your path. You belong here. And I had so much anxiety and relief, and I was like, I'm on my way. This is it. And then Tej, who is sort of my main, that's the teacher I deal with who yells at me, as I like to joke.
That means that's she's your teacher.
I had a really good talk with
tapping
you.
you off.
You were like, she's your root teacher.
Yeah.
She was like, yeah, we don't live in LA anymore, so I don't see her in person every day. But and I did a session with her many years ago, and she meditated, tuned in. She's like, you need to be a successful man of God. And so I took some worldly growth and success in turning what I do into a business as a spiritual practice that was a discipline given to me by a spiritual teacher, my spiritual teacher who knows what's happening with me. And so even like getting the home, having a marriage, having a child, and still focusing on growing more financially and adding more prosperity is a spiritual practice. And I'm just grateful that finally it was like later in life with Kundalini in LA, everything merged and clicked. And I'm grateful that I was grateful that I got to study a very rare and very secret path where you only teach it in secret. There's still a lot I don't share and don't reveal, but it merges with everything. And it's I'm coming from a perspective that was handed down to me. It's not me. These aren't my teachings.
If you're listening at home, Remington's website is themysticalarts.com, just like it sounds, themysticalarts.com. So you can find his book on there.
Look that up, or Remington Donovan. My website, all the stuff will come up.
Yeah, and his book is on Amazon, and you can find all his stuff there. You can get readings with him and so on. I just want to let people know that's all in the show notes. And if you're watching the video, there's a banner going across the bottom that says themysticalarts.com, so you can find him. And that's numerology, which I can say is absolutely amazing. There's a whole bunch of things that I wanted that you said in that whole that thing that I wanted to touch on, but we're going to go past that, because I want to talk about your book. This in the book, right up front, you say that the universe is speaking to us in infinite languages, and numerology is one of them. Is the universe computerized? What's that?
I said, did I write that? That's really good.
Wow, that sounds really good. Did I write that? No. So the universe speaking to us in infinite languages, and numerology is one of them. So is the universe computerized? Can like the world be calculated?
I think that's a great question. I think and very interesting. I mean, I think in the sense computerized in the sense that there's some system to it, but then it's a system that transcends anything a human brain will think of. And so even a computer that maybe as that AI advances, there's something still always going to be higher and something holy and something sacred. And so numerology in of itself, the way it was taught to me, it wasn't about getting to the end result. What does it mean? It's a technique that is a meditative, it's a yogic practice, it's a magical practice. And by going through that, this process opens up your consciousness to that higher sort of the translation, and the understanding starts to come through. But numerology is one of those languages. I don't think of it as a computer, but there's a highly sophisticated organization that I don't think Kabbalists will say you're human, your little p human brain. Don't try to understand it. You get into the flow. Magic teaches we become more like nature. And so, there is a consciousness called Ruach Elohim, which is like your high mind, your God mind, if you will. It's helpful to have a very sharp mind and a smart intellect. But when we become too reliant on that, that's why I teach, whether it's numerology or tarot, even astrology, you got to remove your intellect. You got to let go. And a lot of this was my training. And you said something very important in the beginning, which was a lot of like quote psychics, it comes through their lens, right? And I went through in magic the training and the years, literally years and years and years and years of my life, most of my life. Um, you are taught to remove your subjective viewpoint so your lens isn't a cloudy thing of your own ego. We call that yesod on the tree of life, which is the filter, and that needs to be pure. And even on a practical note, when you're doing readings, to never speak in the language. Assume anyone that's coming to you has never heard of the word tarot, never heard of numerology, never heard astrology. So I can be like, Jago Paul, your Uranus in the 10th house conjunct, which Virgo, your Uranus and Virgo in the 10th house, you know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
that's gibberish. And I notice there's a big movement in all of this, and people are just speaking gibberish because they don't embody it. I embodied all of these and was taught this as a spiritual, dedicated, devotional practice. But it's the practice itself is what opens up your consciousness, right? My teacher, who is absolute master tarot, he said that once you will be good enough that you will never use a tarot deck again.
That's interesting.
Right. So, and then he always said, what are tarot cards? And we're like, they're cosmic language of the universe. It's like they're pieces of cardboard. Right. And like, it's just these tools. Sometimes I'll pull up these tools even in a session, and I just like them because it activates something. But I'll look at astrology. I don't even really, in a way, I barely know astrology. I know these practices. I look at a chart and everything comes to me. I mean, I know what like Uranus is, I know what Saturn is, right? But like, and of course, I'm communicating this in the way I communicate, but you got to learn it. Like most of these people that are reading, they didn't have a spiritual teacher. My
Yeah.
teacher actually said his joke was the lowest people on earth were occultists because they're not a part of a spiritual tradition. All they're doing is moving energies around. So you can like what in yoga, what we call city powers, right? And that's in magic is what we call a wizard. A wizard is someone who maybe has the ability to manipulate energies, but that is just a very low vibe. And people think that that's the powers and that, or you have psychic powers, it's special. And it's disconnected from some energy of God. And you can dedicate your life to moving, manipulating energies around, right? But this is the I was taught everything through a spiritual dharma, through a practice, and through it's a spiritual tradition. And you know, it's just, so it's less flashy, but then when you really do it and put it in practice, when I do a session with somebody, the energy is going to shift and it opens things up and it moves the ball forward.
That's why I said
figured out and said.
That's why I said up front that there's a difference between the people who are the real deal. There's a definite difference, and you just touched on that. But I wanted to tell the audience that I've had several readings with you, and that I notice that you change. Like when you start the reading, we will be talking, and then you change and you connect to something that you're pulling down. That's the only way I can describe it. Can you tell us what that's about? What is that? Like you start the reading, and I'm always amazed. My wife Jamila, she's had many readings with you. We're all good friends, and you've done many readings for us, and we all agree that something happens, you know. And what can you tell us about that? Is it possible to talk about it?
Yeah, and also I want to say sometimes because we're good enough friends that we'll fuck around, we joke about shit, like you know what I mean? Like we're not just acquaintances, like
it's relaxed, yeah.
And you're a friend who helps me move, you know. So
haven't helped you move a body yet, but that's the real friend. But I helped you move your house. I hope that our friendship is already foundational enough that never comes to that. But you know, it probably would help you. You know.
So that I'm really glad you're asking this, because it's something I would always probably wanted to answer and never have the opportunity. Well, so it's, first of all, a lot of it's my training work, and because of our casual relationship that we know we can joke around, and I know a lot about what's going on in your life, it's just you get good. It's a switch, and then what happens is, that's what the point of these practices are in magic, is that all of a sudden the practice is about clearing the way and locking into this higher consciousness. So it's the part of me, it's the higher part of me that is connected to this sort of all-knowing frequency. And so I allow myself to be a conduit of that, but I'm not channeling. Like, I'm not channeling like an entity, or magic is not big on channeling. My mother knew a channeler who spontaneously combusted, right? So these entities, a lot of people are sensitive and they tune into entities on the astral realm thinking that they're connecting to something. And it's like astral realm gibber. It's like the equivalent of like, you know, crazy homeless person in LA guiding,
yeah.
right?
Well, that's a good point.
It's like a homeless encampment. All due respect to homeless people in that situation, but it's like the astral realm is full of garbage and just crazy, crazy entities.
One time I was having a counseling session with Hajivan many years ago, and I don't know, I must have told him something I saw, whatever. He kind of cocked his head. And he goes, "There's assholes on the astral plane too."
That's what I'm saying.
That cleaned up a lot, because you know, you in meditations, you see something appear to you or whatever, you know, or you don't see it, whatever. You hear about stuff that, you know, like that seems like something, wow, and you automatically think that, oh, this is better than me or something, and you want to follow it. But there's, you know, that astral plane's full of, like you said, assholes and homeless people, and then also good stuff.
It's astral entities.
Astral.
I don't know. I mean, it's a part of myself, but it's the part of myself that knows how to do this really well. And I know I do it really well but I swear to, and I can feel a difference. Like, I know. And for me, there's a few, like, as far as doing this, everyone has different ways that they may tune in or quote more psychic. I can see visions. And then I use these tools, and something just the answer, something divine. In magic, what we call that is thoth consciousness or Tahuti consciousness. You actually feel a buzz all here in the back of your neck. and you're tuned into a higher alignment. But because of the spiritual practice, it really is something that on one level is very divine and more God centered, not astral asshole entity central. And that takes practice, and that's the thing. A lot of people aren't trained in that, so they're just like, who knows what the hell they're channeling. But it's all me, it's not like I lock in, I'm like, child Paul, you will then find there's a message for you in Texas. Like, it's like, it really comes through. And also, when you read for people that like, I know it's happening in your life, you don't want to project any of that, because something, you don't know what's going to come in. And it's really that my meditative practice, and using this as a spiritual tool. But I know that it took me a long time. I know that I'm good, and I mean that really humbly. And it took a lot of my confidence, like, wasn't about, my ego is going to tell me I'm a worthless piece of shit, not like I'm fucking awesome, right? And I just noticed how it grew. I've never advertised readings. I do like social media and marketing for like workshops and courses and things that I teach, just to get the word out to like sign up. But as far as my readings, I've never done anything. It's all been word of mouth. And I mean, that's, LA is great because people are very open to that. And then it took on another level based on my readings. And now, I mean, I have a wait list. I have it's a 3-figure wait list that goes deep. Pushing 4-figure wait list right now. And it's because of, it's got to be what I'm delivering. I'm not trying to hustle anything. I never thought I would do any of this for a living. It was like my private little thing. And then I did a couple of readings for people in LA, and they were just like, what the fuck?
It's interesting to hear you describe it, because in some ways, people who have that talent, like you have, like I said, I've watched you, so I'm expressing to the audience what I've seen, that you connect to something and pull it down. I've had the similar experience teaching Kundalini yoga. We used to do these lunchtime meetings with a lot of the longtime students, and at lunchtime, our teacher Harijivan we'd all sit around and eat lunch, and then we would take turns sharing teachings. And so one day I started speaking. I was sharing a teaching. He's looking at me really intently, and I said something. He stopped me. He goes, "How did you know that?" I go, "Be honest with you, it just fell out of my mouth." And he smiled and he went like that. I didn't even know what was happening, but he was doing that. You talk about the master's touch. He was trying to give me that. He was trying to give me that, or awaken that in me, where it's, and I want to go on to another perspective on this, but people should know this, because there's a lot of people out there that don't have this. And it's what you're looking for. It's what you want to develop if you're going to be a teacher or a reader or a coach or that kind of thing, is the ability to connect to something in a lineage, I would say, honestly, but to connect to a stream of energy where you're zeroed out enough where it comes through you. And the next thing I want to say is that about 2011, I think, we were Harijivan and Tej and all were teaching these trainings out of town. They would travel all over the place. He would always say, "We're nomads," but they were teaching a training on communication in Grass Valley. And it was the most remarkable thing. I'll remember it till I die, because the way he taught this was so unorthodox for, at that time, 3HO training or whatever you wanted to call it. We walk into this training on communication. The first night, he pulls up a video of Joe Cocker at Woodstock singing, yeah. Right? And then, were you at that training? Do you remember that?
No, I'm just making sure I know which
Joe. Because when you said that, I thought you sound like you. But all of us were blown away by this training. To this day, he would stop, and he stopped the video, and he goes, "You see there?" He stopped. And Joe Cocker's got the mic, and he stopped at this point. He goes, "You see there? You see?" He leaned back, and something came into him. And because it was a tremendous performance, I got, with a little help from my friends, it's iconic at this point. But he put that video. How was that?
I've seen it. It is
Yeah,
powerful.
exactly. So, but none of us knew this to that point. But and he took quite a few singers, and he even took Osho Rajneesh with there's a famous video of Rajneesh Osho talking about the word fuck, and he's talking about like that, like really, pointedly, and it's very funny, and you can find it on the internet. But he also used that as a way to find, and the whole collective lesson there was, Yogi Bhajan said the basis of everything in human life is communication. He did his PhD thesis on it. But communication, he pointed out with these people, is that these people who we know, iconic, he used Whitney Houston as well, that are iconic and magnetic and have a talent that we all know. He showed us how some part of their spirit would drop into them when they were performing. And I also always remember, like, I think it's Don Rickles talking about, like, did Don Rickles pass away, or is he still around?
If he's alive,
I think he passed away. I think he passed away. But in this information age, it's hard to keep track of everything. But it was the same thing. I think it was a documentary I saw about him where he would be like, oh, like this 90-year-old man in his dressing room, and then he'd walk on the stage, and that very thing I remember seeing in that documentary, something came into him, the light went on, and he was Don Rickles killing the audience. And so I wanted to make that point because, and maybe those people couldn't even describe it either, like Don Rickles or anything like that. They just go, yeah, I get out on stage and something happens, but people should know because it doesn't matter if you're a famous singer. It doesn't matter if you're like Remington, a talented in a certain area and doing it and living it. If there's something that you want to do in your life, if there's something, you have a talent and you know it, right? That's what you want to develop and look for, is that communication with your spirit where something sort of drops into you. But too many people are trying to be like other people or this or that. And they also just don't understand that there's a place when they can be uniquely themselves and really tap into that talent, that something's going to drop in and come out. And that's what you have to nurture and foster and communicate. I don't know. I've gone on a tangent, but I think that's important because it's like, I've watched you pull something down, and then what comes out of you is absolutely brilliant. I recently went back to a reading you did for me in May of 21, and we were driving out here to New Mexico, and I put it on and I was listening to it, and I was like, man, everything that you said was just on target, because this was months after you said it. And I'd made some mistakes where I didn't follow exactly what you said. And I missed some opportunities. And I was like, son of a gun, I didn't have the right filters to actually even process what you were putting through. But what you were putting through was exactly what I needed. Anyway, we can move on from that. But
I do want to just add one quick thing, though. For me personally, what I learned too, and especially now that I teach so much more, is that, like, as I speak, is where something opens up in my consciousness, and then I do feel it come through. And there's something for me about the momentum of speech and that sound current. So when I'm in a reading, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Or you're from Milwaukee, blah, blah, blah. And then it's just, I tune in, I lock it in, but as I start to speak, it comes out. And there's something about that flow of that action of speaking, which I also find now because I've been writing more, and I have another book that drops in May and on prosperity but Harjeevan, I was in it was a face reading class, which he had stopped teaching, and we were in Mallorca. And he said something that stuck with me, which is just what you're talking about. I just want to emphasize this because I want to encourage people, like you said, to tune into that part of them, and that there's an expression. We're all artists, right? And we get so caught up on what is the specific medium, but sure, there's ways that we all sort of flow. But he said, why is it like you could take the exact same music with equally talented musicians, and like they could play the song on a piano, but somebody like Elton John, it's going to come through in a way And it's because of what their energy field and what they're connected with. And even like you take so many musicians that are at that huge professional level, there's a reason and they're fucking good. But like I get a lot of people might hate the Grateful Dead, but I listen to like Jerry Garcia play guitar and he's not even the greatest singer or anything. What is it? Why is it that some frequency in his fingers or energy pattern, and I've heard a million Dead covers, and you know the song, it's totally different. And it's like there's some level of mastery that comes from something that transcends any human consciousness. And that's what we'd say in magic. It's your ability to tune into something higher. And then if you bring it through, I was taught in magic, go do every job with excellence and just show up as an act of service. You agreed to do it. And by doing that more and more and more and more in my life, and it's like what I learned in Kundalini teachers training, just share the sets you love or share the meditations you love. And then the joke was at least one person's going to get something out of it, and that's you. But when you're just sharing that part and stuff that you love, people feel that and they want to be a part of that journey. Like I feel like someone who loves cinder blocks, right? I could probably go to an hour-long workshop about the manufacturing of cinder blocks, not because I have any interest in that, but because some people, you just want to be a part of their journey for that minute because are sharing their love of whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Right? So I share the things I love, which is esoteric, symbolism, numerology, all of this. But at the end of the day, what I love to do is I love to help someone move the ball forward so they can have a freer, more liberated, more successful, bigger life and a greater experience of themselves. And like these are the methods that I use, and now it's writing a lot more,
You mentioned a lot of iconic people, Jerry Garcia and that kind of stuff. It's interesting. You say that there's something in them. It's practice. The word practice is so important because for a musician, that practice creates a pattern, a neuron pattern, creates a pattern of behavior, and then that spirit starts to fill that pattern. And I think that's, that old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. But right. That's why they call a spiritual practice a practice. So meditation is a practice. Yoga is a practice. When you do music, right, you practice. It's because you're creating a habit to create a neuron pattern. What's that saying? I think it's Yogi Bhajan. The man creates the habit, and then the habit creates the man or woman. But that's the thing, is that people they want instant gratification in our technological world, and they want, like, YouTubers want to be famous. Like they did a poll of like these tweens, like 13-year-olds and stuff, and 13, 14-year-olds, and like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be famous on YouTube, is what they said. So it's an interesting time because that's hollow. It's devoid of any real spirit, and then people going for the lowest common denominator. But we also have these spiritual practices. So people who are supposed to have them are going to come and find those. But it's key for people to know. We talk about communication. We talk about that spirit falling into them. We talk about your whole history as an expert in all these areas, and as with the ability to do readings for people. And so people should know that. I just feel like that's what came as you were talking about Jerry Garcia and stuff, is like, it's practice. You're talking about Elton John. These guys practiced, they practiced and practiced. And then they found a way to connect to that where they could open that thing up.
Well, they had they were a conduit of great skill, but their great skill, but they are icons because they went to another level and then became a conduit where something just comes through. I had the opportunity many years ago to meet Paul Newman, and you talk about whatever, some kid.
Did you tell Jamila that? She loves Paul Newman.
No, I never have, actually.
Oh, Jamila's like, that's her big movie star crush.
Okay, so I fucking have a crush on Paul Newman. His energy.
I do too, man. That guy is like.
And I've seen some movies, I liked it. You're like, okay, wow, good actor, Chuck. But when I met him in person, and I was working at this very fancy hotel, and I was like one of the main like waiters. And so I became like, I was the guy assigned to deal with Paul Newman. And he was like, he's transcending a level. I lived in LA for years, so I've met tons of actors from A-listers to what you name it. But Paul Newman, and he's not even that tall. My God, the energy of everything changes. He walks into the room. He has a suit on, and like you see him in not suit clothes. He's sort of small. He can like shift his aura and just sort of hide and seem low key. But then he just flipped a switch. He had a suit. Him and his wife. He just comes into the dining room, and like it was almost like being in front of like a very high teacher. And he was a very kind man. Like he was very much a sweetheart and very sincere. And that you're like, oh, like he holds a frequency that's so different that it is beyond any skill of an actor. He used that skill, but that was like, I've met like big world leaders, Margaret Thatcher, whatever, Bernie Sanders. Like those are powerful auras. Those are auras that the whole world has. But I have never met anybody like Paul Newman,
That's the
and
radiant body.
he is a master of it. But he was a master at humility. And he was like the kindest guy, and I was like, I just was like, it's such an honor he was so nice. He's like, trust me, so the honor is all mine. And then he treated everybody like equals, and like he even went on a little picnic, and he invited the like staff and people that he just wasn't like, very Aquarian, if you will. And then he really created a lot of money and raised at that time, that was in the 90s, like $250 million that he distributed through to different charities and things to help people. So there's something. What I feel like is the way you get to those calibers. Some people are just born in tune with it. Is these practices, Kundalini yoga, meditation, whatever. There's a lot of traditions. These are the ones you and I do. They change that energy field within you, and then you access something higher, and stuff just starts coming through. If someone's listening and they want to be a good tarot reader or astrologer, sure, learn your symbols and stuff, but you're better off like getting into deep devotional, reverent meditation and spiritual practices, and then go for it. Like it's going to come from that, not your knowledge of looking at books that Saturn and Gemini means you can you command a serious presence when you speak or something like
that. Or you could just put up a website and become a coach.
Well, my joke now is like, now if you're not interesting or you don't have a personality, you can just become an astrologer.
Well, that's the big joke these days, that if you're like, I'm 25 years old and I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life, so I'm gonna be a spiritual coach. But regarding Paul Newman, though, there's a great mini series documentary done by Ethan Hawke. Have you seen it? I think it's on HBO Max. Oh, it's fantastic. It may be on HBO Max, or it might be on a different channel, but you can find it if you just look up. You can find anything these days, right? But I watched this thing, and it's absolutely remarkable. First of all, so you talk about Paul Newman, and it's like that. I hate that word gravitas, but they use it, right? So, but he's got something, and it's the radiant body. That's the radiant body where the soul is penetrating outwards, where it's so intense that radiance, it hits you when they walk into the room. Their aura hits you. But Paul Newman, he also had a lot of troubles, with alcohol, things like that. Not terrible, but he also had sort of self-image problems, ironically enough. So it's important to see that, because even the greatest of the greats, they have all those human problems. And when the thing about this documentary that's so interesting, I urge people to watch it. It's really fantastic. What Ethan Hawke did was, before Paul Newman died, there was a writer or director or writer-director who wanted to catalog his life, and he they did these interviews and recordings. I think they might have just been audio recordings, but no, some audio recordings, but they did these, they filmed it, and they were going to make this into a documentary. And at a certain point, Paul Newman destroyed it all. But before before that was destroyed, all of these recordings were destroyed, whether they're film or audio. The writer or director had them all transcribed, so there was a record of them. So what Ethan Hawke did, which is absolutely brilliant, was he got a lot of his actor friends together, mostly Broadway actors, so real legit actors who act in plays, and he had them read the parts of all the different people that had been interviewed about Paul Newman and Paul Newman himself. So there's all these actors playing the parts like it's a play from this transcript that was supposed to be a documentary. And now it's a documentary like that. It's a mini series, so it's several hours long, but it's absolutely remarkable because it goes into his life, on every level, with Joanne Woodward, his wife, because they were remarkable. They were absolutely in love, and also both working actors, and that what that was like for them to be when having a family, because then Joanne Woodward had to go into the role of wife, but arguably in the beginning, she was more famous than him, and she had much more success than him. And so there was all of that dynamic, but and so how their marriage worked and how love won in that, and how Paul Newman ended up becoming a big star. But throughout, he also had a lot of problems with like alcohol, and also his sort of self-image about that. Like, he destroyed all that stuff for some reason. He didn't see it as great as it was. So yeah, he's an absolutely remarkable character in history, and a remarkable actor. When you watch him, he's another example of that kind of communication. You just watch anything he does. There's a few actors like that they'll do something and you want to watch everything. Denzel's like that, Paul Newman's like that, Robert Redford's like that. And, we need more people like that had that. They were classically trained actors, but in every area of life in the Aquarian age, we need people to understand that it's not the instant success, or the likes on Instagram. You have to find a craft, whatever that is. And, the craft of the mystic or Kundalini yogi is the practice, the meditation, whatever, right? But you have to have some field of operation or field of work where you go into that, and you're able to turn on the flow of your spirit into what you're doing.
That is so well said. And that's the thing, is like, you do these practices to access that flow of spirit. The other piece of the puzzle that I feel like sometimes people get confused or sabotage on is, in the way it was described in magic, is you do all this stuff and you sort of are building up this big spiritual bank account, this big energy field. You need to now pull that and do something in the world with it. Like, and you need to take it. And so that's why it's really important to like do something creative, whether it's business, whether it's art, but it's just otherwise you're living a monastic life. Like, you're just building up energy for what, you're never even going to shoot your wad. And it's like, you gotta these traditions is like, what are you going to create? And are you going to like teach? Are you going to, like, you could just excel, even if you have a job as a banker too. And a lot of my clients, that I had a client the other day who sort of misconstrued their life as a failure because they had a pretty successful sort of corporate job, right? And they really are into all of this sort of spiritual stuff, and they'd love. And I was like, you know what? Like, and I looked at their thing, like, that's just as much a part of like, you're taking all that spiritual energy that you have access to and pushing it through into the world. So what if it's like, this is a job, you get paid really well? And she finally she was able to admit that she loves it. And I uncompartmentalized her life, where a lot of people are too strict in thinking, well, I want to be spiritual and do that for a living. Like, it doesn't mean you have to go be a yoga teacher, right? I never thought being a teacher was a viable thing. I just thought, well, there's a few people that do that. And then all of a sudden, especially because of Hari Jivan, he just kept sort of egging me on in a nice way. And it just sort of finally I just started doing it. You know, he kept egging me on, write the book, because I was like building up all this energy. I needed to push it into something. And it's funny because I wrote the first book and I sent him a signed copy. I was like, Hari Jeevan, I wrote the book. And that's like what I wrote in it. And I can't wait for the second book because I'm going to say I wrote another book.
That's
But,
great.
you know, he recognized something. You also, to be honest, you know, you may not remember this, as many years ago. It was something you said to me that was a pivotal thing in my life that helped me on the course that I am now. And we were at summer solstice, and I shared with you that I had a dream that I was in Cantor's Deli in Los Angeles, which those of you listening, if you know LA, Cantor's is like, that's like the Cat's Deli of New York. It's like this famous Jewish deli place. Used to be open 24/7. Also my old neighborhood. And I had a dream that I was in Cantor's. And then all of a sudden, the server came and gave me this blue bottle, and it had etchings of Guru Gobind Singh all over this blue bottle. And I just felt an energy. I thought it was cool. But you said, well, that's the tantric force, and that's the message that you need to start teaching more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the blue tantric force and the Guru Gobind Singh. Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, that's a really right interpretation of that dream. And it was really right around that time. And I overthought teaching, you know, and then finally my first class that I taught was at a treatment center. And I just tuned in and I taught a set. I don't know how much people liked it or not, because they're like 11 days off crystal meth. They don't really want to be meditating for 20 minutes, you know.
Right.
But that changed everything for me. But your words, so you should know that I hadn't even these bigger teachers, you know, really encouraged me. I was so nervous, and I swear it was that dream and you just saying, I was like, you know what, he's right. I should just start teaching more. What's the big deal?
Yeah, I remember when we were sitting around that table there, I didn't know that anything I said was worth a shit.
Yeah,
but
it was
it's good to know. It's good to know that something landed.
It was one of those it was a life-changing conversation for me, because
I'm grateful to hear that.
So you should
Awesome. You know, when you were talking about earlier about people being able to hold it, I think you said, that's another important point. There's two things you said that I wanted to touch on just now. One is about being able to hold it. If you want to be, if you want to be big at what you do, you better do something to expand your aura. And that's like physical yoga and that's meditation, because the bottom line is, I don't care what you are. And you can do all you got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Kundalini yoga, I have found to be the best, fastest, most advanced technology on the planet today. And I took the red pill, I drank the yogi tea, as they say. I coming from New York City, West Point, the Army, to now being a baptized Sikh and looking like this. I tell people I'm either absolutely nuts or this shit works, right? So, but the point I wanted to make is that if you want to be famous, whatever, and it's perfectly fine. If you want to be famous at something, let it be a service to mankind, but you're going to have an aura to hold it. You have to have the nervous system to hold that energy. And this is something I never said, but I've always had a pet theory, and I'd love to know what you think about it. But do you see big celebrities, big people melting down? And we talked about Paul Newman. He had his problems. But everything's connected. So when you're a big personality, you're big in what you do, and a lot of attention from the world is focused on you, that's all energy. It's all projected energy. And I think that's why a lot of famous people crack up, is because they don't have a way to absorb and let that energy pass through them. That's one thing that I wanted to say. So if you got to have a practice if you want to be, and I don't care if you're a CEO or if you're, whatever you are, if you want to be able to hold a big space in what you do in this on this planet, in this life, you got to have a big aura. And I found that I suggest Kundalini yoga because that it's fast and it expands all the 10 bodies, where you can go and run marathons, you can do all that kind of stuff, but slowly just working in the physical body is not going to work as much anymore. You got to have you have to have this mind-body computer operating at the highest neuron voltage, and the way to do that is like work the electromagnetic field to the glandular system and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, it's an advertisement for Kundalini yoga, but it's you said that, like about holding it, and that's when we talked about those people in that training that I mentioned, that even pointed out. These are big personalities that we all know, and you got to be able to hold it. Everybody wants to be famous. You got to be able to hold it.
Well, what is the radiant body, which would be attributed to fame or at that expansion of huge energy, that's nobility. What is the teaching on radiant body and numerology, which is attributed to the number 10, is it's all or nothing. So people that have that capacity for something great also have a capacity for great sabotage. But something, I used to work a lot in working on that treatment center and in these recovery spaces, and you meet some people. I've met people that are so huge and successful in their field or in life that came from nothing. And I had a good buddy who was at LA, like hardcore street, the types of gangs that are there. They do like cheesy documentaries on. He was in these and spent many years in prison. And, he was he was a tough, bad guy, and he was a higher up. And he's the sweetest, most loving guy who's dedicated his life of service to others. And like, that transition, right, to me, I was like, that is so powerful to go from that to what he's doing now. He does have pretty successful job, working in film stuff and everything. He's not famous, but like his transition was huge. And it's like you meet these powerful people. So you also got to remember, and that's what I like about keeping the space open for yoga, is like, you could be down and out and destitute, and like if you just start adding more of this stuff to your life. When I met you, I was actually like literally living off $200 a week unemployment in Los Angeles. Like I had nothing. I couldn't afford classes. It was because our teachers let me come on a donation. And but they recognize, like, so you gotta like know that someone who's really fucked up is probably capable of great success. They just need to put the energy in the other direction. And that's how numerology works. Each number can go big in either direction, right? And we're coming into we're soon in 2023, we're gonna be in a 7 year, and 7 is just like, hey, I'm showing up, I'm gonna make your life better. I'm going to make it nicer. I'm going to make it brighter. It's a platform for elevation. In Kabbalah, it's Venus. It's like sweet and lovely. It's like, it's nice things, right? It's more money, like, and nice things that money can buy. Or you can just fall into a confused, decadent, just gross, vain, just overconsumption of things because you have no connection to your soul. So like, I just think that the person and like a number can go in all these different directions, but great, like the higher you climb, the bigger you fall. That's like, I was always taught that in magic. And as you advance spiritually, the way it was taught to me is like, there's other forces gunning for you. And it's just like boxing, right? You want to fight the guy with the belt, is then you have your shot. So if you have the belt, you're going to have more people gunning for you. And that's how magic or spiritual development was. So, even on our spiritual path, on some level, we get tested. But magic is
back the light.
All about service. I don't teach this a lot, but because a lot of people misconstrued magic think magic is tarot and manipulating energies and being all mumbo jumbo and psychic. And it's dedication to your great work and your soul. And the whole point is to do these practices, do these works to come into and remove the things. The universe will serve you, you know, if you just be you, right? And that's basically magic. But there's all these things that we allow to not be us. We do these practices, we do this work, and then imagine at some point we become so good at our true selves. We share that big love with the world, whether it's through acting, whether it's through teaching, music. Maybe you just are fucking rock star barista, right? And uh, that that caliber, that energy, at some point in magic, the real test comes in is when you think it's about you, right? If I think, oh, you're coming and you're studying Remington Donovanism and not the techniques that I'm teaching, and I think it's me, that's when you go dark. That's when one basically falls because your ego comes in and thinks, well, I'm the awesome one. And you forget that all of this was meant to be a greater service to the evolution of humanity.
Yeah.
And that's where people go dark. So maybe it's not the spiritual path, but it may be a great actor, an artist. Like, it's just a big space, and they don't have the tools to handle it. We've seen it with so many people.
Yeah, and then there's those that do handle it, which is cool to see. But I want to go back to, you mentioned being, early days, salad days, they say it, being on unemployment, $200. And then you mentioned a reading you did for a woman where she was successful, but she couldn't see it because she had a day job. That brought to mind, and I want to tell people this, those two things are so very important because you have to enjoy wherever you're at, number one. And number two, the picture outside, or the picture that's portrayed in movies and TV about what success looks like, is all bullshit. There's a great book called Daily Rituals by Mason Curry. I read this thing all the time. I have it on my Kindle and I read it all the time for inspiration. And it's Mason Curry is an author. He was a struggling writer like everybody else, and he was looking up what other writers and artists did to get going. What did they do in the morning? What did they do? Where did they go? How did they eat? Where did they go out drinking? They smoke cigarettes, whatever. And he was so interested after finding this stuff that he made it into a book. I think it was a blog to begin with, to be honest with you. He just blogged about these things. And then somebody said, you need to make this into a book. And so I found this book, I don't know where, and you go into it, and it's remarkable because there's a lot of different writers. There's composers. He's got Benjamin Franklin in there. There's people from the 1700s. But the thing that I took away from that is there's at least two authors in there that he talked about. One, I wish I could remember the name. It's some famous author from a long time ago, maybe like the turn of the century. But this guy was an accountant, and he went to work every day, and they became a famous author because he'd come home and he'd write in the evenings after work. And somebody said to him, well, why don't you quit your day job, man? He goes, oh, I can't. He goes, that's all part of the process. I got to go work with those numbers in the daytime and then come home, and I can relax and I can write. So there's no freaking formula or answer on how to make that connection. You got to, like you said, just be you. You got to find the way to be you, and you got to find your own rhythm. And boy, that's tough. I've spent many years trying to do that. I'm still trying to do it. Jamila as well. Jamila is a fantastic artist, and a lot of people listening to this podcast know her work. And she, just like everybody else, she has those same challenges, like finding that rhythm, especially in today's world. But I would say that anybody who heard that, what Remington said earlier, that this lady was down and out because she and I think you mentioned that she actually was like, oh, she actually enjoyed the job, right? So,
yes,
so
she wanted to do something spiritual, and I said it's all combined. And also, she had a great chart for like big corporate success, and I'm like, you could also look at that as part of your spiritual practice and something that your soul wants to do.
Yeah, people don't realize that. People don't realize that, like, this is another big teaching, just like where it comes from and all that kind of stuff, and how when you make the connection, it can just fall out of your mouth. Another thing Yogi Bhajan taught extensively was your presence has to work. Like when you're a teacher, and this I found it was remarkable in that book about Swami Rama's life, is that when you've got that when you've practiced enough and the teachers activated it in you, and it's the gurus activated in you, whatever that may be, and it's just sort of coming through you. There's nothing to be done or calculated. You walk into the room, like you said, Paul Newman. You walk into the room, and your aura, the vibration of your aura in relation to the cosmos starts to work on the people in that room, because everybody's connected. So that woman who's a corporate, has got the corporate success in her chart, she's, she wants to do something spiritual. Let's just be the best she can be at that corporate job and walk into the room every day and inspire people. People need to know this, that like you can be in the world and be, there are all kinds of adepts. Like where I saw this recently, but somebody was talking about this recently, where it was on Instagram. There was a post on one of these Buddhist channels I follow, where they said there's so many enlightened beings that you don't even know, because they're just in the world doing a job. Milarepa's teacher was a farmer, and everybody knew him because of word of mouth that he was a great master. But Milarepa's teacher was a farmer, and he was a total enlightened adept. And you see that a lot in the Tibetan tradition. We went to Tibet, and there was one monastery we walked into, and there was this mural, a big giant tanka, if you will, on the wall, a spiritual painting of what was called the 54 Mahasiddhis. And these were all enlightened Maha, meaning great cities with great yogic powers, that all were, one guy was a baker, and another guy they were fishermen. They were all in the world. They were in the world. It's very important for people to know that everything is spiritual, because everything's the one flow.
That's why you can't spiritually bypass, because everything's spiritual.
Yeah, that's why spiritually they want you to spiritually bypass, so you shut up, because that puts them out of business.
Totally. Yeah, those are all important things. And like, sure, I happen to like my life sort of aligned where the things that I'm interested in, which are, quote, these spiritual teachings and topics and esoteric teachings. Okay, I do it for a job now, like it's my business, but that took me a long time. I was like going the opposite end and avoiding it and thinking, well, I always have to have a job, and then I just have my sort of private spiritual, the job supports my private life to do those things, so I still have reverence excuse me, for the job. But it took me a fucking while, man, to get my act together as an adult, I suppose.
Yeah, but same here, man. Trust me, and I'm still doing it right now. It's never over. That's the thing. That's why, like our teacher says, just enjoy it. Whatever's going on at the moment, just find some way to enjoy it. I was rewatching the video of him going to New York in December 21, right after Guru Jagat died. And he's talking about her death and, how painful it was. And he goes, you know what? I enjoyed every moment of it, because I was there and I had to, we're, as you know, in New Mexico. My mom's this 3-month odyssey in the hospital. She's coming home tomorrow. And she's still got some problems. She's coming home, but she's got a lot of challenges with, what the surgery left her with. And Jamil and I are like, we would rather be back in Los Angeles, but you know what? We look at each other and we're like, we're going to look back on as one of the greatest times of our life, the most opportunity, biggest heart opening, all that stuff. So wherever you're at, enjoy it. But
dude, I would love to be chilling in New Mexico right now.
Dude, well, you guys should come out, man. Get in that Forerunner, bring that awesome baby, and come out, man. Spend a couple of days up at Consequences.
We love New Mexico, but we're trying to get you guys.
We're coming. As soon as we get a break in the action and that crypto goes back up, we're going to come out. But listen, I want to take this. I'll go for 3 hours if we could. But there's like 1 or 2 more questions I wanted to get into with you, because I think people will love it. We answered most of them, in one way or the other, in this sort of roundabout thing. But Hajiman's been mentioning this lately very subtly, where he goes like, we're in a simulation. So, and he said this the other day, which I've been meditating on, is that we're in a simulation. He goes, if it vibrates, it's in the matrix. if it doesn't vibrate, then you're in a Shuniya state, and then you're outside of it. You go into that flow. But what I wanted to ask you is, what do you think about this idea that we're living in a computer simulation, a sim like the Matrix? And well, I'll go the second part later, but basically, like, do the numbers create our reality? But this, like the Matrix, right? Those numbers are streaming down, streaming down, streaming down. This is a computer simulation. I wanted to explore that with you because I have a hard time, like I've met a lot of people, getting my head around that. Like you see the Matrix, we all know it's a documentary with the first one and stuff like that. Once you wake up and you see that, holy shit, that's a documentary. This is all being manipulated. But what do you think about that? That we're living in a sim like the Matrix, and do the numbers create a reality? How can we use the numbers to our advantage? Or what do you think about that?
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, so in the tarot, there is something called, there's the Magus card, the Magician card, but outside of the tarot, the teaching is the magician is the master of illusion. And so that teaching, you think stage magic, maybe you think, oh, they're able to manipulate and deceive and fool. But you know what the real teaching of the magician is the master of illusion is that we live in this world. That is an illusion. So yeah, it's a simulation, whether you want to say it's computer, simulation, Maya, but in magic, we are the masters of the illusion. So we live in this realm where we are just it's full of illusions, and we learn to be masters in that. And so we know, so we understand that it is very Matrix, like in the sense that it isn't everything that we see, right? That the devil card in the tarot has a big third eye, right? And the deeper teaching is that is a third eye that opens to nothing. So it only opens to the illusion of what you see in the 3D in front of you, right? And so that third eye is really a dark third eye that is a disconnect. Well, what are we seeing right now? So much of humanity is so disconnected. They only see the 3D illusion in front of them that they think is the only reality. And so it cuts the soul, and we're losing sight of our infinite selves. And I think we're seeing this, and we're seeing the people freeze up more, and this energy's in the shift. And so, yes, we are the masters of illusion. And then numbers reveal a lot. And then absolutely, we can use numbers. I'm not like I don't like necessarily lay out numbers to ward off evil, if you will. I guess I use the numbers. Really, it comes down to knowing whether it's in your chart or who you are. I know, okay, what numbers do I access? So every year I teach the numerology of the year. Every year we sell numerology reports, right? So we have a number for the year. Like I'm having an 8 year as recording this in 2022. That's my personal numerology for the year. So I say, okay, that is a code, right? That if anything, whether you don't even believe that the numbers hold a frequency and a vibration, you can say, well, this activates a spiritual teaching. And there's lessons to be had, and there's things and courses of action that I have access to. And 8 is infinite life force. It's vitality. It's a healer. It's like high energy. It's just, you got a lot of juice, right? You're fully charged battery. And I realized, God damn, if I had to draw on that amount of energy for the changes between having a new baby, learning, navigating, buying a house, figuring out how to come up with all of that money, moving again, learning to remodel a house. I've never installed hardwood floors. Now I know how. While I got another book deal, I had to write a book. I hosted my first retreat and still trying to maintain the business. And then we have a new child, a baby. And so every day I'm like, I got to draw on that breath, that life force. I need to draw on that energy, and I need to draw on that vitality. And thank God that this is happening for me in an 8 year where I have access to that. But whether or not you have access, it's a reminder, what do you need to do? So 8 is the number of pranic life force. I need to do things to make sure I get a little extra prana. What's the easiest thing? Sure, some breath work, right? So, and Kundalini, almost every meditation involves some breath work. But even for my own psychology, to know, oh, this is my year of energy, I didn't burn out. And believe me, I was coming close. It was hard, like just life exhausting things. And then the output in navigating one bedroom apartment to like a place in the country with land and a wood stove. And I'm like, I got to chop wood, like all this stuff. I feel like I'm a homesteader now. But, like, so I use the number like that. And what number are you this year? Do you remember?
Oh, how do you calculate that again? It's the year. It's your birthday with the 2022 or something, or I don't.
Um,
I don't. It's been so long. I don't remember honestly.
well, I know you
I
have
think it's
four,
a 4. I think I'm in a 4 year.
but I know you have fours in your numerology, and that, for example, is knowing you need to draw on big picture awareness
Mhm.
and be like neutral and open, say, as opposed to judgmental and pissed off, which is probably
This is
old
most
joke.
of my life. Was most of my life. I've been
Yeah,
humbled.
right, but that number that can go that way, it's the same thing. What I like with the numbers is you realize, oh, let me just flip it. Because what's the dark side, if you will, of 8? I like to say it that way, it's just fun and dramatic. It's not dark. Is like crash and burn, fatigue, no preparation, being in debt, and just not having any resources or energy, right? And if I went that way, I could have easily sabotaged all of this, you know? And, um, that's just like, you gotta use it as a trigger and you gotta apply you have to do the work. That's the thing. People message me, what number is good for selling a house or something? I'm like, it's different. Like, pick a number that's right, and then you got to go make it happen at other levels.
Yeah, you can take it too far. Like it becomes a neurotic thing where your insecurity. You go to the practice out of your insecurity. That was actually one of the other questions I was going to ask you. It seems like so many people go to the sciences like numerology and astrology to help ease their insecurity, though. So, but how would you say people should approach these arts like numerology, astrology, Kabbalah, all that stuff as power tools? How do you take the insecurity out of it? Because everybody wants to know the future. It's fear of death, fear of the future, right? So I'm scared. So I'm sitting here thinking I don't do anything, right? I don't actually get started. I've suffered from that myself. Gary Vee, for those who know him, he's a very motivational, successful speaker online. He says, you got to do shit, man. You got to do. And what you're talking about is you're so consumed in your life. You don't have time to be insecure about anything and you're just getting it done. People should know that if they're feeling insecure about stuff, just go do shit. But that's my piece on that. But people go to these things out of insecurities. People think too damn much because we're taught in school to think too much. How do you give people advice on how they should approach these power tools of astrology and tarot as a way? How should they approach it?
Well, first and foremost, nothing is set in stone. And if everything was set in stone, there would be absolutely no reason to use astrology or tarot or numerology. There'd be no reason to look into the future, if you will. So if I do a tarot read for you, progression of events, and look into something, what it shows is the trajectory of energy based on sort of where you're at now, and it sort of reflects that off into that trajectory. The reason we do this is, okay, oh, look, bad things happening or whatever, conflict, issues, financial law, who knows, right? But it's like the whole point is that we maybe will learn, and it's the whole point is then we navigate it differently. So in tarot, in a sense, there are no negative cards, and people take that in a whole different direction. But like, oh, it's still a great card. I'm like, no, this is a shit card, but it's like a warning gauge, just like, but you can't get all freaked out. It's not who the hell, when your gas light comes on and it's like time to get gas, nobody's like, oh my God, like I'm cursed. The world is ending. The universe is out to get me. I was born under a gray cloud
Let's
or
go
whatever.
get some freaking gas. Yeah.
You're like, oh, you got to be like, thank you, universe, for inventing the gas gauge. Oh yeah, I gotta pull over and get gas. Maybe I don't love it, but whatever. It's not a big deal. You're grateful, because imagine the anxiety you would be driving without a gas gauge and never knowing how much gas you had. And like these tools, so you got to know that the tools were given to us from something higher so we could manage and navigate better, and that it's a message to let us know that there is no fate. Nothing is set in stone. Because if it was set in stone, what would be the point? If you couldn't change anything, what's the difference, right? So we have these tools because we are able to change, and we're able to maneuver and manipulate and adapt. And I use it for that. I pulled cards today. Just how do I navigate my day? Nice little insight. And I was like, yeah, this makes sense. And if a quote negative card, which one showed up, 10 of wands, which is oppression, but I know, like, okay, like, where am I? I'm just personally trying to make things too hard, or maybe I just have to accept I'm trying to get more work done today than maybe I will. And if I just let it go, everything else said, you're going to have a great day. And so I didn't look at that and said, oh, I'm going to have an oppressive, hardship, burden riddled day. And that's the thing. You got to get out of fate mentality, because that's just victimhood mentality. And there's a lot of victim astrology and a lot of victim astrologers out there.
Yep.
My joke is you should be able to sue them.
Yeah, there was some guy who was a psychic guy at one of these yoga studios, big yoga studios I worked at a long time ago. And he started telling this woman that, she's having all these problems because of her father and stuff like that. We all looked at each other and like, and he was highly esteemed by the owner of the studio and so on. And like, and he had the look and all that kind of stuff. And we all looked at each other and went, this guy's an idiot, because he's putting like negative stuff into the person and so on.
And here's something very important. This is how it's taught. You have to, as a true reader, you have to be specific. And you have to give a course of action, and you need to speak in solutions. And that's what you have to do. And there's very few real readers out there. And they're not specific, or they're like, whoa, I see a lot of negative forces, man, coming at you. I could look at a chart. I could see sexual abuse. I could see this weird thing. I could see violent, whatever. Little insecurities and things come up, because as a good reader, you have to you bring it out in a way, but not to tell, like, you bring out a way to say, now let's work. What's the solution here? And if you're not giving, someone at the end of their reading has to have a course of action. They have to have a solution, and they have to know what to do. And the course of like, you had courses of action, and you look back, you're like, oh, I could have done a few more things than that. And we don't always do it, right? But that's what's really important. And very few readers are trained in the lineage of a spiritual tradition. I wasn't taught in a psychic tradition, not a bunch of mumbo jumbo and psychobabble of, oh, my gifts and talents. Like, fuck that. You're better off probably going to a super adept, successful life coach, like a real one.
Yeah. I would just say to people, if you're having a tough time, adopt the attitude. And I got this from Hari Jivan, and it's my way of life now. There's been a lot of stuff that's dumped onto us for, the last couple of months. And is that just look at everything as working in your advantage. So harder times, I did a whole podcast on this. You can find it on the podcast website, but hard times are actually a huge blessing. So, people go to, they when they're having trouble, they go to other people who seem like they have the answers to try to get those answers, but they go out of insecurity. But you should definitely seek out advice and help. But as much as you can, if you adopt the attitude that everything is working in your advantage and you're just trying to find more information for the toolbox to navigate the next best move for yourself, the next thing you got to do.
I agree. And another sort of way to say that sort of similar teaching is like God is never going to give you more than you can handle. The other flip of that is like God is never going to give you more than you can handle. As you up your caliber, as you up your game, you can handle more things.
It's my experience that God will go right up to that fucking line, though.
Well, that's what we said. If you can't organize your sock drawer, how are you going to how is the universe going to give you bigger, better opportunities? So it's like I see a lot of entitlement, or someone wants to, I see this in LA, like I'll have a client, they want to go and be some rock star guru yoga teacher. I'm like, yeah, but you just took a class. So like, I mean, it just doesn't work that way. It's like the YouTube star, TikTok influencer paradigm. And just fucking put in the work. You got to just relax and start moving into things you love. And if things are tough, remember that everything is working. It's just what you said. But my teacher, I love, like, God isn't going to give you more than you can handle, because I've definitely been pushed to my limits at times in my life, and I always like pull through. I push through. So all of this is meant to be helpful, hopeful, inspirational, and on some level life changing.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I call this podcast the One Flow, because if you trace it back, like in any situation, if you trace it back that it's all coming from that original one flow of creative consciousness, that solves a lot of problems. And that's the Mu mantra. That's Ek Onkar, Satnam, etc. Right? That's what it is. It all goes back to that sort of one flow. But you mentioned about these YouTube people and stuff like that. Does one Kundalini class? That's that meme, right? Your headdress and sparkling everything, and it does one Kundalini yoga class, and the coaching.
People get like inspired and want to move it forward. And I've seen some people they're tuned into something, they just take it, they build it out, and they're just going with it,
Yeah.
So
there is that too. It's rare though. I mean, there are some people who they get that, the switch goes on and they got something, but almost all of us got to go and, and climb up that ladder and whatnot. But so we're pushing 2 hours here, but I do have one last question for the good people.
I got to switch. I got tag team babysitting.
Okay, well, but can we just do one last? Yeah. It could be quick. It's just if you can broadcast one message or piece of advice for the entire planet, what would it be?
That, like, you got to really, right now, especially with everything that's going on, and a lot of people are falling for a timeline or a message or an imprint of severe scarcity, no matter where you are, political spectrum or not. And it's really important to like sort of sit still for a bit and just, on some energetic level, take that deep breath and say, you know what, I'm exactly in the right place right now. I'm exactly where I need to be. I have literally, everyone listen, you have everything you need in this exact moment. Take a load off and move the energy from there. And there's a lot of prosperity to be had right now. And just know that you're taken care of. And don't lose sight of that.
Thank you very much, Remington. This has been an absolute joy. For those of you listening, thank you for joining us on this rambling journey that we had. I very much enjoyed it. The information for Remington and for the rest of the stuff on the podcast and socials and stuff will be in the show notes below. Please like and follow and subscribe wherever you are, whatever socials you're on, or if you're on a podcast platform like Apple or Spotify, please, leave a review if you like this. It helps us out. Like and subscribe to our channels and stuff like that so that you can get more of this stuff as it comes along. So thank you, Remington. And until next time, this has been the One Flow podcast, and I look forward to seeing you guys at another time.
Thanks, brother. And you're getting your butts to Vermont. I love you, man.
Oh, yeah, we're on our way. We're totally on our way. Satnam.
Satnam.